Yeah, so this idea of a mismatch between the gut microbiome and the gut connectome is something that most people have probably never thought about. So our gut, with all its cells in it, is obviously determined by our 20,000 genes. And even though these genes can be modified by epigenetic influences, it's a pretty slow and sluggish system to respond to environmental changes. So on the average, it's been estimated it takes between 10 and 15,000 years before our genes can adapt to a new environmental situation. And this has happened several times in our evolution, from our earliest ancestors, these hominids, and then hunter-gatherers, to agrarian societies, to today. A few times these genetic changes did happen. For example, our GI tract changed. Our colon became smaller because we needed less capacity to absorb food that had been fermented by microbes in the colon. So in summary, a very reliable, steady system that makes up our body and our gut. Then we take the microbiome. Hundreds of millions of genes, so multiples of our human genes. The hallmark of the microbiome is it can rapidly adapt to new situations. So you go from a carnivore diet to a vegetarian diet, strict diet, and within 2 days you already see the changes, both in terms of which microbes are there and also what chemicals that they produce. So very different from our gut system. So now you look at what happened in the last 75 years. The diet and the chemicals they ingest has changed dramatically. The microbes have adapted quickly to this, and that's why we have the kind of compromised microbial diversity, and many species have disappeared, strains have disappeared, because it has adapted to this unhealthy environment. Our gut hasn't been able to do this. Our gut reacts to this changed microbiome in the way that it turns on the alarm bells, which is the function of the immune system. So this engagement of the immune system in our modern diseases, both first in the gut and then throughout the body, has to be understood in relationship to this mismatch about the microbes who are way ahead of the game and have adapted to a world that has dramatically changed, in our gut that still responds in its ancient response pattern, meaning engagement of the immune system, which doesn't really is not good for our bodies and our health. But the immune system understands what happens inside as a threat to the integrity of the organism. You can compare it, it's in some way similar to what happens with our stress system within the brain. So that stress system in the brain has evolved as a very effective way of keeping us as a species alive, warns and protects us against the threats that our ancestors have experienced, from starvation to wild animals, to temperature changes. But it stayed the same. Those response patterns at the brain level, those stress response patterns, have stayed pretty much the same. It's no longer appropriate to have that system to respond to our chronically increased stress level, which is not life-threatening, but is affecting everybody every day, from traffic to worrying about financial situations, the economy, political situations. So we have two systems. One is the gut and the gut's immune system. The other one is the brain, that have these ancient response patterns, which have evolved in evolution, determined by genes that are very slow to respond. And we have a system like the gut microbiome that has rapidly adapted to these changes. And now we have this mismatch, which is probably at the core of most of our health problems. You could speculate, and that's obviously, we're not going to see that being tested in any way soon. If you could wait 10,000 years or 15,000 years, until our gut adapts to these new lifestyle changes, that we no longer would have this mismatch. We would not have these, this inappropriate engagement of the immune system. But that's obviously a hypothetical scenario that will not, maybe as a species not even live long enough to see that happening.